Welcome to This Week in Christian History, a podcast from the Center for Christian History at Mississippi College. The Center for Christian History is dedicated to expanding knowledge and understanding of Christian history. Our mission is to provide a scholarly, unbiased look at the events, figures, and movements that have shaped Christianity over the centuries. You can visit centerforchristianhistory.com for daily historical highlights. And each week on this podcast, we'll do a deep dive into key moments with Christian history's leading authorities. Our first historical highlight for the week is Sir John Oldcastle, a follower of the Lollards. The Lollards were a group of Englishmen, led by John Wycliffe, who fought for the supremacy of Scripture over the authority of the Pope. Oldcastle was charged with heresy by Archbishop of Canterbury Thomas Arundel on September 29, 1413. After hiding out for years, Oldcastle was eventually turned in for a reward and executed. Our next historical highlight and the subject of our deep dive is George Whitefield. Whitefield was an 18th century Anglican preacher and a major figure in the first Great Awakening revival in America. It is estimated that Whitefield preached over 18,000 sermons to over 10 million listeners in his lifetime. He died on September 30th, 1770. Our final historical highlight for the week is the formation of the Baptist Missionary Society for the Propagation of the Gospel among the Heathen. The society was formed by a dozen Baptist ministers on October 2nd, 1729, and its first leader and missionary was William Carey. Today in our deep dive, Nick Walters, director of the Center for Christian History, talks with Thomas Kidd of Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary about George Whitefield.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of This Week in Christian History. We are exploring on this week of September 29th, our episode to talk more about George Whitefield and the using his death date of September 30th, 1770 as a kind of a marker for us to be able to talk about the good Reverend and the impact that he had on Christianity, and particularly in the U.S. and as well as within Europe. And so we have our guest today, Dr. Thomas Kidd, who is a church history professor and research history professor at Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary in Kansas City, Missouri. And Dr. Kidd, thanks for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, the first lesson anytime we talk about Whitefield is we have to figure out how to pronounce his name, right? You know, I mean, you
Yeah,
can probably tell whether somebody doesn't know if they call him Whitefield. Is that probably right?
it is. Yeah, in fact, just this week I was correcting spelling on Whitfield's name in one of my classes, and you can tell that it was pronounced Whitfield because even in his lifetime, it was often misspelled, without the E in the middle. And so but when it's spelled right, it looks like it's Whitefield, but we know it was pronounced Whitfield.
Absolutely. So give us some just background on him. I mean, did he start off going into the ministry? Was he trained for that? Did he end up there because he was doing something else and that's kind of where he ended up? Or did he start
Yeah.
off that way?
Well, he spent most of his life in England, and so he grew up in Bristol, England, and a broken family. His father died when he was very, very young, and then his mother did not marry well the second time, and so they were poor. And he worked in a bar for some of his teenage years, serving drinks and cleaning up at a bar, and so not a very promising background, but it was clear he was good in school. He especially had a talent for public speaking. And so I do think when they realized how good he was at public speaking and also acting, that he might have some talent that would feed into being a preacher. And so his mother and he figured out that there were ways to get scholarships for relatively poor children like Whitefield, and so he was able to get into Oxford University. And usually, when people went to Oxford or Cambridge, those were the two main English universities of the time. Usually, being a pastor was one of the options on the table, like Harvard and Yale at the time. A lot of the people who went to Oxford and Cambridge in the 1730s did end up becoming Church of England ministers. But it wasn't entirely clear for Whitefield, and he was unconverted as a Christian when he went to Oxford.
Oh, okay.
But so it wasn't totally. Maybe he would become a lawyer or work in the government or something like that. But while he was at Oxford is when he got converted, and then that made it very clear that he was going to become a minister.
How about that? But so he was not affiliated necessarily with any particular church at that time. I mean, everybody was Church of England, or could
Yeah,
you be nonconformist then, or
the default for everybody in England at the time was that you were Church of England, and if you were a Baptist or a Presbyterian or something, you were called a dissenter. And then that if you were a dissenter, you couldn't go to Oxford or Cambridge.
Oh, okay.
And so he was Church of England, but that was pretty nominal. I mean, he was baptized as a baby, and went to church, went to a church school, and went to church, but he was certainly not particularly devout or anything until he was converted at Oxford.
About that. So but his early affiliation, where is it from the time then that, because you had to be licensed to preach, right? And you had to be licensed by by the government, right? I mean, and you had to, but that also meant that if you were a dissenter, or it wasn't going to go too well. Is that probably right?
Yeah. So because he was a Church of England member and then priest, I mean, there was a relationship there between the Church of England and the English government, and so he was ordained. You're ordained first as a deacon, and then you become a full-fledged minister. So 1730s, he receives ordination, and he very quickly, even without an appointment as a local parish minister, he begins preaching a lot publicly, and he just proves to be phenomenally gifted and talented, and we would say anointed in his preaching, that it just draws first hundreds and then thousands of people to come hear him preach. And so one of the reasons he begins preaching outdoors pretty quickly is just simply because there are very few churches that can hold the crowds that are coming to hear him preach. Your average, even a large church, doesn't hold more than 1,000 people, and he's got thousands of people who are just pouring in to come hear him preach. And by the late 1730s, he's preaching in London to crowds of tens of thousands of people. And so he goes out to, these large greens, in public greens in London. And I mean, there was at least one crowd at Hyde Park in London in the late 1730s, as reported as 80,000 people came to hear him preach. And that may be grossly inflated, but I mean, so what? If there's 40,000 people there, this is one of the largest crowds ever assembled in human history, and so the effect that he has is just absolutely electric.
Wow. And so certainly, I would guess then, is it along that period of time that he and the Wesleys connect? I mean, is that? I mean,
So
you draw 80,000 people, you might meet a Wesleyan somewhere along the way, right?
Right.
I mean...
So he knows John and Charles Wesley from his time at Oxford. John is about 11 years older than him, and so John has already graduated and has become an Anglican minister. But of course, they're better known for founding the Methodist movement within the Anglican Church. It's not originally a separate denomination, and isn't for a long, long time. But it's an Anglican renewal movement that is promoting, heart devotion to the Lord within the Anglican Church. And there's a lot of nominalism within the Anglican Church because it's the state church. And, for a lot of people, if you're baptized as a baby into the Anglican Church, I mean, you're kind of all set. But the Methodists are saying, no, the biblical model is heartfelt devotion to the Lord, evangelism, serving the poor, visiting prisoners in jail. That you really need to be really radically committed to the Lord and to your faith. And so Whitefield encounters that as part of his student days at Oxford, and that's part of the reason why he ends up getting converted at Oxford as a student.
About that. So connecting with them and then becoming more affiliated with that whole Methodist movement. How did that happen, and when did that happen, and how does he end up being over in the U.S.?
So the Wesleys are helping him with, he's saying, like, what should I read? Like, give me some, and they're sharing like Puritan classics with him, and just classics of Christian devotion and so forth, and that plays a role in his ultimate conversion that happens in the mid 1730s, and then he starts preaching. But they're also telling him that he should consider going to America as kind of a missionary, at least on a short-term basis. And so his first visit to America is pretty brief and goes in around 1737. But then he had already started getting famous as a preacher, goes briefly to America for the first time. But then he is really becoming a kind of celebrity preacher by about 1738. He comes back to England. He's drawing these giant crowds like the one in London. And so when he goes to America the second time in the late 1730s, now he's really become famous, and he's more famous than either of the Wesley brothers by that point. And so when he returns to America in the late 1730s, there's a lot of media build up for his visit to America, newspaper reports of this kind of boy wonder preacher. And so he starts attracting, there's no city anywhere close to the population of London in America at the time. But he's attracting crowds in Philadelphia and Boston that are larger than the population of Boston or Philadelphia at the time.
Wow.
Because there's so much buildup about what an incredible preacher he is. And whenever he preaches the first time, he's drawing ever larger crowds after that. And so, he speaks in Boston, and there's, 25,000 people there when only 17,000 people live in Boston at the time.
Wow.
So he preaches on Boston Common, and it's just, this incredible sensation. This is actually the time in Philadelphia when Ben Franklin gets connected with Whitefield. Now, Franklin is no kind of Christian believer.
Sure.
He goes to church and so forth, but he's a little, skeptical about.
He's a deist at best, right?
Yeah. Well, he calls himself a deist, but Franklin realizes as a young printer in Philadelphia that Whitefield is something that nobody has ever seen before. And so Franklin sort of desperately tries to get kind of an exclusive contract to publish Whitefield's stuff. And so by the late 1730s, Franklin is publishing, Whitefield's sermons, Whitefield's travel journals, which are some of his very best-selling materials. But Franklin is also publishing anti-Whitefield material. Just anything he can get his hands on. And Whitefield's fine with it. He's just like, more publicity means more exposure for the gospel. And so I'm great with that. And so Franklin ends up partly becoming independently wealthy because he makes so much money off of publishing Whitefield's stuff. And so this is part of the reason why Franklin is able to retire early from printing, because he becomes independently wealthy. And then Franklin goes on to become first famous because of his scientific and electrical experiments. And then ultimately Franklin becomes the most famous because of his diplomatic work for first in Britain and then for the independent American government. But he's set up to be able to do that because he becomes so wealthy as a printer, partly from publishing Whitefield's stuff.
You can watch the rest of Nick's interview with Thomas Kidd on the Center for Christian History website at centerforchristianhistory.com. This Week in Christian History is produced for the Center for Christian History by Blue and Gold Media at Mississippi College, in cooperation with the MC Department of Communication. For episode transcripts and more information, visit centerforchristianhistory.com. Be sure to subscribe on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and follow the Center for Christian History on Facebook at the Center for Christian History, and on Instagram at Christ Hist Today. That's ChristHistToday. Our next podcast episode is coming next week. Thank you for listening.